Hello and welcome back to the Guns on Pegs podcast. My name is George Brown and I'm the editor at Guns on Pegs. I'm joined as per usual by Chris Horn. Chris, it's been a little while.
It has. I feel slightly awkward about it. I mean, we're all good now, aren't we? I think that's the important thing. I'm just pleased to say that I feel like I can do this again.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we probably do owe everybody a bit of an apology. I've had lots of messages, which is always nice that people are missing us, but we have kept people waiting for too long. Long story short, I think it was just what was the delay caused by? Basically, it was that time of year, November, December is always our busiest time, isn't it? At Guns on Pegs, but then we've also had just this sort of continuous flow of people being unwell, families being unwell, team members being unwell, COVID, flu, colds. We've just had a bit of a sort of perfect storm of everything, haven't we?
I just had a message from someone saying they just had Novid, which is this thing that's not COVID, but it's definitely like COVID. And yeah, we've been clobbered left, right, and centre. And obviously, both of us have got kids in nursery, so like everything's been coming back. And times before Christmas, I'm so pleased it's behind us. Anyway, let's move on. It's like we're here now.
Indeed. Right, so let's crack on with it then. Since we've been missing for so long, tell us about our guest today.
So, today we're joined by the High Sheriff of County Antrim, Northern Ireland. He's actually a member of the St. Moritz Tobogganing Club, would you believe? So we're definitely getting onto that in a minute. But more importantly, for today's purposes, he is chairman of the Irish Grouse Conservation Trust. And through his role, he, along with colleagues, won a Gold Purdy Award back in 2020. So looking forward to talking about that. A very warm welcome to Peter Mackie.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. And you guys say you're nervous. I think I'm probably more nervous.
We're very gentle. Peter, I want to know about the St. Moritz Tobogganing Club.
It is do you know anything about the Cresta at all? The Cresta run?
A little bit.
My uncle talks about it. He's done it.
Well, it's an amateur sport, and it is luge, but kind of head first. And the run is based in St. Moritz in Switzerland, and I think it's one of the fastest ice runs of all. So it's faster than bobsleigh, and it's certainly as fast as a lot of luge. And it's a bit like shooting. It's a lot of camaraderie. It's a lot of good fun, kind of entertaining times between January and February to the beginning of March. And it's just a very exciting sport, but it's something I got. Some of my family did it in the 80s and 70s, so I then got pulled into it, and I used to sleep on the kind of car parks just because I couldn't afford the Swiss franc. But it was just really good fun, and it just means you can crest in the morning and you can sleep in the afternoon.
What kind of speeds are you hitting then when you're hurtling down face first?
Well, I think the good guys do about 80 miles an hour. I probably do about 40 miles an hour, maybe 50. But there are two elements. There's kind of doing it from Junction Hut, which is about 2/3 of the way up, and then doing it from top, which is when it gets a lot scarier. And that's when you kind of are very quiet, and that's when it kind of sobers you as you look down the run. But if you do it from Junction, it's something you can just have a dash in the morning.
But with your chin on the ice doing 50 mile an hour, that must feel like about 150.
It does. It is tremendous fun. There's no doubt about it. But I don't think I go as fast as I used to.
So I would imagine that when you've been down the Cresta run face first, you probably need a drink afterwards, which brings us nicely on to my favourite segment. Peter, why don't you start? Tell us what's that you're drinking?
Well, I was going to have a kind of preamble to this one because I was going to talk to you about the hot bath and the kind of the drink by the hot bath after a long day shooting. And I was going to talk about a local distillery around here, Bushmills, and they do just this epic whiskey, which is kind of matured in acacia wood. And then I thought, well, actually, that's after the day. I thought, what am I doing during the day? It's not like during this interview. And so I thought, well, actually, I'm going to do a bit of a shout out here because, you always talk about kind of all the kind of English spirits, but I'm going to talk about Bertha's Revenge. And this is an Irish sloe gin, and it comes in a mega bottle with a handle so it doesn't slip out of your hands. and it's made down at Ballyvalan, and it's really delicious. Actually, I'm going to show you a picture of it because that's a good sized bottle. And the name Bertha, I just like it. It's just kind of, she was an old cow. It's an old cow. She was, and so they named their kind of sloe after that. Anyway, apart from the bottle and the kind of marketing, actually it drinks really well. So I'm going to hang on to this Bertha's Revenge sloe gin.
Oh, that's amazing. So you won't believe this, but I've got a bottle of that sitting on my desk in the... they actually very kindly sent a bottle into us that they said you might like on the podcast.
Is your bottle open or shut?
I haven't had any yet, so I was saving it for the next episode. But what's the chances of that? It's quite a niche drink, and it would have been perfect to have on this episode. But I chose to have another one, and it would have been mad if you and I had the same obscure sloe gin from the middle of Ireland.
Unbelievable.
But I'm pleased to hear that it drinks well, because that tempts me for when I'll be opening it.
It drinks well. You can be reassured of that.
Good.
So, Chris, what have you got?
So, George, I have. I've been sent another drink. You know, when we started this, you always said, "Oh, we're not getting any drinks."
Yeah.
Well, so I've been sent another drink, and it's really good. And so basically, it's called a gunner. Have you ever heard of gunner?
I have heard of it. Is it a non-alcoholic drink?
They do. So I've got two on my desk. They've got a saint and a sinner. And so basically the sinner is obviously the alcoholic one, and the saint is the non-alcoholic one. And basically it is a effervescent mix of ginger, bitters and lime. So a classic drink. But the sinner's obviously got a shot of dark rum in it. And it's really good. Now, it's middle of winter, obviously, at the moment. And I can imagine myself in the summer, these will disappear rather quickly. So really quite nice. I'm quite impressed by it. And it comes in a can, 4.5%, not too bad. So, yeah, thank you to Gunner. I'm enjoying this.
Yeah, very nice. Gunners are drunk at my cricket club in the summer quite frequently by those who've got to drive home. Not that specific brand, but the the drink from which they've obviously drawn inspiration.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So this is Gunner, the original. So they've obviously created a brand around the drink. The non-alcoholic one I'll crack into after. But I'm sure it tastes just the same. But yeah, really good. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Gunner. So George, tell us what you've got. What have you come back in with? I hope it's a good one.
Well, I think it is. I'm feeling a bit pleased with myself because, as I've discussed before on this podcast, my wife is Slovak, and we are heading out to Slovakia at the end of January, and I have managed to fix up a day's pheasant shooting in Slovakia for when I'm out there. So in celebration of that fact, I'm drinking a Slovakian Tokaj.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Pudding wine.
I mean, it's very nice. Very nice. I've not had any before, and so I didn't really know what to expect. It's 2011. I know absolutely nothing about Tokaj, but it's not like majorly sweet, but it's very, very drinkable.
I love a Tokaj. I had a Hungarian Tokaj not long ago.
Yeah, so this is actually from my sort of the end of Slovakia, the far end, which is where my wife is from. But I'm actually going to be shooting at this end of Slovakia, if that makes any sense. So yeah, it's going to be great.
Peter, have you got any Tokaj knowledge?
I was grasping for straws then. I couldn't think of anything.
It's quite niche.
It's niche.
That's good, George. I like that you've gone a bit sort of different on us. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, I can't drink whiskey all the time. And also, I had a lot of whiskey over Christmas and New Year, and I've run out. It's the long and the short of it. I've run out of whiskey. So, yeah, it's nice to have a change. I'm very pleased with it. It's great.
Good. Right. So, over to you with your next favourite segment.
Yes. So, Peter, the next regular segment that we have is called Whose Bird Is It Anyway? And it's when we ask our listeners to write in to pod@gunsonpegs.com with their shooting quandaries and queries and dilemmas and all that sort of thing. And we do our level best to help them out. We keep our correspondents anonymous to avoid getting anyone into too much trouble. And this episode's Whose Bird Is It Anyway submission comes from somebody I am going to call Leon for no particular reason at all. Leon writes, Dear George and Chris, there are many different reasons why individuals go beating. For example, for a day of exercise in the countryside, to work their dogs, and for the banter and camaraderie of the beating line. However, I think people should look at beating as the most accessible way to get a day's shooting. I'm a student and go beating on a commercial shoot with a big bag, and therefore a day's shooting there is one I could never dream about participating in due to the several thousands of pounds it would cost. I carefully picked which shoot in my area to go beating on, as my sole motivation is to do enough days to qualify for the Beaters' Day so I can experience shooting on an estate of this quality. Is this bad of me?
Oh, quality. I love this. This is a proper question, this.
Yeah, I like it.
It's very strategic, this one.
Peter, straight over to you. What do you think?
I love it. It's strategic. Yeah. It's clever. It's Machiavellian, I think.
Yes, very much so. I don't know, Chris, what do you think?
I think he's bang on. I'm putting myself back to like when I first started going beating. If you knew, I mean, the intention to go on the Beaters' Day, it's got to be up there. No matter what someone says to you, surely the beaters on that particular shoot. I think that's a perfectly justifiable reason for choosing where you go beating. No problem at all. I mean, yeah. I got absolutely zero issue with this.
Well, I'm on the same page. I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all. I mean, you could, if you were being hypercritical, you could say, maybe there's a little syndicate down the road that could do with a few more beaters. But, go beating where you want to.
Yeah. I mean, so what? He's emphasised the point here about I'm a student and I go beating on a commercial shoot with a big bag. Therefore, it would, cost him a lot of money to be able to do that, which is understandable. So he's picked that shoot because that's the particular shoot he wants to be able to shoot at.
Yeah.
That's even more justifiable than just going on your local syndicate.
Yeah.
Because it's all about variety at the end of the day. I wrote a piece on this the other day.
But there's two elements of this, because, of course, he's wanting a big bag. But in my experience, at the end of the season, the bag tapers off. And then you've got the Beaters' Day. And they go and have a record day every single time. And I often wonder how that happens.
That's because there's 25 guns out.
And they work that just a little bit harder.
Yeah. I think that the whole variety that he's getting, like he's getting a day in his diary that he would never get otherwise. And the bit that I alluded to that I wrote the other day was saying to shooting people, if wherever possible you can put a day in your diary that you wouldn't otherwise do it. And therefore this person is able to do that without having to pay for it. Even better.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why I'm shooting in Slovakia, because every time I've been there, I've every time we're in the car, I've got my nose pressed to the window going, oh my God, look at that landscape. I'll bet you could push some good partridges off there or whatever. Yeah. I'm sort of realizing that dream. So yeah, go for it. Just go for it. Have no shame.
George, are you doing a season's beating first?
No. I'd have to have a conversation with my boss about whether I could go and live in Slovakia, and I'm not convinced it's completely logistically possible.
I think there'd be issues, wouldn't there?
Yeah, there might be. But
George, the biggest issue you'd have is you'd have to turn down all those invites you get in the UK, and I'd have to take them.
Both of them.
Both of them.
I do think that there's we've had another email that I want to bring in at this point. We do have an international audience for this podcast. I don't think it's being arrogant to say that. So we've had this email from a correspondent on the other side of the Atlantic named Evan, real name. And he says, "Hi guys, I'm an upland hunter in Alberta, Canada, and I was wondering if you could answer a question for me. How would you suggest someone in North America builds connections in the UK hunting community? I know I can book a shoot, but I like to hunt here with friends and would like to have some friends in the UK to go on shoots with. Cheers, Evan." So that's a completely different sort of story, isn't it? But coming at a sort of similar problem, which is how do you build up those connections when you're thousands of miles away and can't go beating on the local syndicate or whatever?
Yeah, that's tough, isn't it? Peter, what would you do if you were Evan?
I think it's open to misinterpretation when he talks about hunting, because you might think it's on horses, which would be a different ball game altogether. I think it's got to be guns on pegs, isn't it?
Oh, you can come again.
So the problem is, yes, Guns on Pegs allows you to get in touch with shoots, but it doesn't market itself as a sort of dating agency or a friend finder. However, there could be an opportunity. I don't know. It seems to me like he's got to get over here, and he's got to get out on some days. He's got to start meeting a few people and let this known.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very difficult from a standing start, so to speak. However, I do have one idea, which is that obviously people who have their correspondence read out on the podcast become recipients of the most noble order of the Garter. And as we know, the people who have become members are an incredibly friendly, generous, kind bunch. And it wouldn't surprise me if somebody in our little community wasn't prepared to offer an invitation up to Evan. I'm not going to mention any names. I'm not putting any pressure on, but it is the kind of thing that might happen, and it wouldn't surprise me if it did.
That's a good point. Because the thing is, if Evan came over and let's say he just booked a peg on a day, like you can. We know a website that can do that. But let's say you did, you would then say to that host and the other team on the day, look, guys, I'd love to sort of join you again or find some other shoots. If anyone's got any days, please do consider me. I'm coming over every so often or whenever he's coming over. And you'll get to know people really quickly. And it is a very small world. But I don't know, it's a weird, you almost sort of begging for your supper slightly, aren't you? Like, you're going to have to be supremely kind, bring all the gifts. Like, your etiquette on the peg's going to have to be on next level.
Oh, yeah, you're leaving a lot of birds for your neighbours, aren't you? For sure. There's a very good book called How to Be Asked Again.
Yes. The shooting fraternity is remarkably generous, though, especially if they feel there may be an invitation and return in Alberta.
Yes. Actually, Peter, you've hit the nail on the head here. We haven't gone to this point. You've got to dangle the carrot. Evan's got to sort of rock up with, I've got sort of 15,000 acres of walked up snow grouse in Alberta, and can I come on your syndicate? The answer is every time yes.
In fact, I feel like sending him an invitation now.
There you go.
There you go. So Evan, I hope that helps. And, if anybody is keen to ask Evan to come and join them on their syndicate next season, drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs and we'll put the two of you in touch. Right. Time for some controversy, Chris. Have we got an unpopular opinion?
We have. Except I'm not sure he's shared his opinion. So this one comes from someone that George has called Gordon, who writes quite simply and in full capitals as well, so you can sort of get an idea about his writing. The point which angers me more and more: to shoot through or not to shoot through, especially in December. That's all he says. But it came through with a subject of unpopular opinion. Now, we haven't discussed shooting through, I don't think. I mean, considering we're nearly up to 50 episodes, I don't know how we haven't. But this this is absolutely a point where people have an opinion. So, Gordon, thank you for sharing. The only problem is I don't know what your opinion is on it, and I'd really like to know. However, because he says to shoot through or not shoot through, especially in December, I'm guessing he's one of the people that says in December you should always shoot through, because of obviously lack of daylight towards the end of the day and fitting the day in and so on. Peter, what do you think on shooting through or not shooting through?
I think if Gordon is a shooting through kind of guy, he obviously doesn't have a social life. Because I find that by the time I've kind of shot through and then sat down for a late lunch and then poured myself that extra glass of whatever it is, and then I kind of get in the car, go home, and then my wife says, but we're going out for dinner. God. And you've got to lie, and you've got to say, absolutely brilliant, I'm there. And you've then got to force down this kind of delicious dinner, and you feel like a foie gras goose at the end of the day. So even though in Ireland our daylight is even worse than England, we tend to have 1 hour for lunch, and it means that you're still in at 3:30, 4 o'clock.
So you can get the day in, and even in December you can shoot without having to shoot through and then stop for lunch. You can get that lunch in.
You've got to be pretty brutal with your guests.
Yeah. I mean, we shot on New Year's Eve here. We did only did 4 drives where we'd normally do 5, and we did have an extended lunch. An extended 11s and then a big supper. But by the time we got to the last drive, the birds were very much all going up to roost. It was a seriously wild day, but I wondered if it was even worth doing the final drive at that point, because we all wanted to be inside. The birds were definitely not keen on being in the cover. They wanted to be back in the pen where it's nice and warm. So I think, as you say, you've got to be pretty brutal with the timings, I think. And do we have some statistics?
Just quickly on, you just said something.
Do you not think it depends? Do you not think it depends on what you're shooting? If you're shooting a pheasant, yes, they'll go roost. But if you're shooting woodcock or wild birds, they tend not to be quite so watching the clock or the daylight. So you can just get that extra drive in.
It reminds me of, George, when you said birds going up to roost. I remember growing up on shoots in East Anglia where birds going up to roost added that little bit of extra height on them. I like what Peter said, because I like the outspoken nature of this unpopular opinion, and that if you shoot through, that you don't have a social life or something. I like obnoxious comments like that. I'm firmly on board with that, Peter.
Thanks.
Chris, what's your preference?
I'm agreeing. I'm with Peter. So stop at lunch. Make sure that you structure the day so that you can do so. And if that means getting there a bit earlier and then starting promptly, do so. Because lunch, we go shooting to have a laugh with other people. And lunch, I think, is a really important part of that. It breaks up the day, gives you a chance to reflect. I just really look forward to it. The only time I think it can be an issue is if you have been so wet that coming inside, getting you changed and all the rest of it can be a problem. But apart from that, I think the daylight thing is just a bad management of timing, and so I don't like it.
Well, I'm afraid to tell the both of you that you're on the wrong side of public opinion. We've got some census data that from a couple of years ago that says that 54% prefer to shoot through, and 45% like to. That can't be right. Somebody's got the numbers wrong there. But basically, more people like to shoot through than want to stop for lunch.
The 1% shoot through so they can drive home early without having lunch. And
I heard a good thing about the other day about when you're so wet at lunch, and up in North Antrim here, we have often days like that, and so we have 2 coat days. So, and I thought that was quite extreme. And then a friend of mine turned up this weekend and he was shooting, and he's from Fermanagh. He said, not only have we 2 coat days, we have 2 cap days. And I get it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, New Year's Eve was definitely a 2 coat and a 2 cap day.
God, New Year's Eve. That was bad, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it was wild.
I was so wet. I was wearing like so I won't name the brand because it's unfair on them, but they got a really good jacket. And up to my elbows eventually got wet. It just sort of seeped through and just climbed its way up my shirt and, down your chest, having gone down your neck. And that was one of those ones where you're like, I'm looking forward to the end of this.
Yeah, I mean, what I learned on New Year's Eve was that my coat was pretty waterproof, but not even remotely windproof. It just cut through me. It was, it was a hell of a day's shooting. It was hugely good fun, but my God, it was nice to get back inside again. Right, so we need to decide if that's an unpopular. Well, we don't know what his opinion was. So, okay, are we saying that preferring to shoot through is an unpopular opinion?
The thing is, it's unpopular on this podcast because there's 2 of us that agree with that. But the problem is you've just gone and ruined this unpopular opinion thing by giving us the sort of unarguable statistic. George, can we resurvey that thing? I don't like the idea that 54% like to shoot through. I think we need to put that in the census again because I would like to see that number change.
Anecdotally, I've never come across anyone who likes shooting through.
Well, that's settled it then. It's an unpopular opinion.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, right then. So moving on. Since this is the last, as it were, normal episode of season 5, I thought it might be quite fun to revisit the piece of correspondence that made us laugh the most in this series. Some of you will remember that in season 5, episode 3, US dove shooter Jeff was asking how best to deal with a fellow sportsman, Mr. Johns, who had a tendency to overestimate his ability with a shotgun. And slightly bafflingly, Jeff suggested that the solution might be for him to stop sleeping with Mr. John's girlfriend. We couldn't at the time really understand what he was on about. We were baffled, so we asked Jeff for a bit more detail, and he's responded. And, well, it's not really an explanation, I don't think, in that it doesn't shed any light on the girlfriend situation, I don't think. But we've got an update, haven't we, Chris?
Yeah, he's just gone on to be a bit more Jeff, hasn't he? So,
yes.
There you have the glorious 12th, the opening day of the grouse season. Here we have its pseudo equivalent, the glorious 1st of September, the opening day of the dove season. This is cause for our group to convene several weeks in advance and scheme the coming season's hunts. Mr. Johns felt compelled to come along with us, and given that none of us have the technical acumen to remove his name from our group texts, there was little we could do. It turns out that so far this year, Mr. Johns was simply not the burden to us which had previously been. This was due in large part to the arrival of twin girls, antecedent to the opening of the dove season here in South Texas. When the lot of us were at the aforementioned dinner some months back, he seemed quite overcome with consternation regarding the possibility of missing out on a season bird hunting with us. He seemed genuinely saddened at the prospect of missing the travel, the shooting, and the mirth which invariably are present on all of our outings. He also voiced concern regarding the potentially negative impact his absence might have on the overall sustainability of our very informal shooting syndicate. It was quite touching, really. Being fathers, one and all, we assured him, and copiously so, that his dutiful place was at home with his family. We cited Freud, we cited Jung, we cited half a dozen others. We did our best to impress him upon him the importance of being with his children at this stage of their development, to grasp this narrow window of opportunity to bond with his daughters, to seize this unique moment in time that will inevitably, ephemerally pass in a father's life, but make a lifelong impression on the souls of his progeny. Mercifully, Mr. Johns bought into all this shit and he decided it's time time was more appropriately spent responsibly tending to this newly acquired brace of daughters than irresponsibly skyblasting doves that were crossing the horizon. There is a God.
Oh, well done, Chris. You did well to get through that without wetting yourself.
That's very good.
The whole thing does rather beg the question, whose daughters are they?
Good question. Yes. What you're doing here is you're feeding Jeff like bits of sort of opportunity for response. So we're going to get more back for this, aren't we? What we actually need to know is after the end of this dove season, how good was it without Mr. Johns?
Yeah. And was it any less sustainable?
And did you manage to get the DNA test sorted? Yeah.
Brilliant. Right. Well, thank you, Jeff, for coming back in touch with us. It's always nice to hear updates on these things. So if anybody else is listening and they've had some advice from us and it has worked out well or badly, which seems the more likely occurrence, do drop us another email and we'll be glad to read it out again. Right, so Leon and Gordon and Evan and of course you, Peter, are now members of the Most Noble Order of the Garters and will shortly be in receipt of your very own set of the highly exclusive Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters. If you have got a shooting confession, a quandary or a query that you'd like us and our guests to help you with, or an unpopular opinion and you'd like a set of garters, drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com. Right then, so Peter, you've obviously been incredibly instrumental in helping the recovery of grouse in Northern Ireland. I know next to nothing about grouse shooting in Northern Ireland. Can you, and I imagine the same is true of a lot of our listeners, can you give us a sort of potted history of grouse in Northern Ireland? So if we went back 100 years, what was the situation like then?
Well, I should probably just focus on the moor, which we've been working on, which is Glenwerry. And if we go back to the 1930s, 1940s, they were shooting 100 brace days. But in Ireland, the density of grouse has always been far lower than in certainly Yorkshire or England and parts of Scotland. And the bird itself is slightly different. It's slightly bigger, it's slightly heavier, and it's slightly paler. And that really reflects the habitat. So there were viable moors in about 1920s, 1930s. But really after the First and Second World War, obviously a lot of keepers joined up. They didn't come back. And so a lot of these moors stopped being keepered. And that was probably the first nail in the coffin for viable moors. But there are grouse in Ireland, simple as that. It's just they have been extremely persecuted over the following 100 years.
So is that because of the obvious raptors that any grouse moor would see? And what makes it so different? Is it just because there wasn't the effort to maintain the moors in the same way that you would say get in North Yorkshire? Is that why you're in the sort of you found yourself in the situation you're in?
It's slightly more complicated. It all, as it always happens in Ireland, it's all about history. We had something called the Irish Land Acts, which really started about 1880 from memory to about 1911. I think the last one was the Wyndham Act. And that really meant that the big estates had to sell land outside, which wasn't being farmed. And this is really all because of, I suppose, potato famine and all sorts of historical reasons. But what it meant is that the sporting rights got disenfranchised from the fee simple, the freehold. And then what happened? That was fine. And I remember shooting when I was 16, so the 70s, around Slemish. And, there was, we'd have a really nice walked up day. And it was about 1975, the European Union brought in headage for sheep. And that meant you got paid per sheep. And so every single sheep farmer just put as many sheep as possible on their moors, because obviously there was no interest in the grouse or the game birds because they didn't own the sporting rights. And overnight, it wiped out the habitat. And I remember going shooting the next year when I was 17, and there was nothing there, absolutely nothing. And that's really, I suppose, it stuck in my mind about, what on earth do we do? And it was only much later when Lord Dunluce, gamekeeper down at Glenarm, reminded him that they'd shot 100 brace days at Glenarm or Glenwerry, and we should be doing something about it. And that was really kicked the whole project off in about 2006.
That's amazing. So when was it that they were shooting those 100 brace days? What sort of time frame are we talking between the 2006 and whenever it was?
I'm just trying to look up my notes. It was about actually 100 brace days in the late 1950s. And when Robert Luff, who was the retired keeper, recounted them all in 2004, they only found 4 pair of grouse on a 7,000 acre moor.
So 50 years, you could decimate something of significant value by poor politics. Or a lot quicker by the sounds of things, but yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah, no, it's and what then happened is, of course, this is just one moor, but if you actually looked at Ireland as a whole, grouse then got red listed by the European Union as a bird which is disappearing, and that was really part of the reasons why we kicked in and said we've got to do something. So it was the Birds of Conservation Concern in 1999. The Irish grouse, or the grouse, was then added to that list.
So I was going to ask, what made you decide that it needed to be you who took action to do something about red grouse populations in Northern Ireland?
That's a really interesting question. I'm not quite sure if I know the answer either. I suppose because I'd done it as a teenager, and I saw what fun it was, and saw how amazing it was, and I'd shot grouse in Scotland and Northern England, and actually even in Wales. And I just thought, well, actually, we have to have a go at doing something. And it was just that window of opportunity where we had a group of people who were prepared to fund it, to start it all off. We had the sporting rights over half the ground, and we were able to persuade 5 elderly farmers on the other the part of the moor to contribute and join in. And so therefore, all the kind of bits of the jigsaw just converged in a very unusual moment of time. I think it would be a lot more difficult to try and do it now.
So what was it that you needed to do? What were the problems that needed addressing to give the grouse a chance to come back?
I think it's the age-old thing, is the 2 elements to it. The first element must be the management of the habitat. And the habitat was extremely badly degraded. There was a lot of white grass there. There was still overgrazing, even with our partners being involved. And so there was a lot of education about how we should manage this upland area. And that was part of it. And the other bit, which is you guys know so well, is all about vermin control. And you've got to have a really hungry, active, energetic keeper. And they've got to really focus and really bring down the vermin. And the problem in Ireland is that you do create a vacuum. You don't have a neighbouring estate to take the pressure off. So not only are you shooting 200 foxes or whatever it is in 1 year, but you'll do that year upon year upon year. But that has been the 2 main parts of the jigsaw.
I think what needs to come across, and what I just want clarification on here, is you're embarking on a monster project at this point, because this isn't something that anyone else is doing, and you've mentioned partners already. Presumably, it's not like any estate going, we're going to do a bit of work and we're going to try and bring a few grouse back. This was on another level of engaging all sorts of people. Who were you engaging, and what was the sort of setup work like required just to get you in a position where you could head off and try and make this a reality?
I think that if we'd known what the issues were at the beginning, we would have just finished with a very good dinner and said that was a lovely idea and end of story. But you know what it's like. You start a project and you just get immersed, and you're suddenly on this hamster wheel, and it's actually quite difficult to get off. But to make this project work, we actually created a charitable trust, because what we wanted to do is we wanted this project to run over 5 or 10 years. And then we wanted to share that knowledge with other people. So other places in Ireland who wanted to kind of, I suppose, conserve grouse or improve their habitat of their moor. So every single element we felt had to be measured. And that included if we were doing any heather burning, what kind of vermin control. And to put it in the context, so we had 10 subscribers who were, just incredibly valuable, and they all were friends. And we had a very good managing director with Adrian Morrow, and he was extremely good on the ground and a huge diplomat. And we then had to form a kind of a management kind of agreement with it, which is called the Glenwary Conservation, and involved in that. So remember that this area is an ASSI, it's an SPA, a Special Protected Area, and an Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. So you've got that to start off with. And then you've got to bring in, so we had to have the NIEA, the Northern Ireland Environmental Agency. We had the NI as a Northern Ireland Raptor Society, so raptor surveys, because of course we wanted to be able to converse and discuss about this issue of hen harriers. Then we had Queen's University doing Irish hare surveys because Irish hare was under stress. We had AFBI, so the Agri-Food and Bioscience Institute, so Habitat and Vegetation Survey, and that was under Professor Jim McAdam, and that was critical because also it meant we could measure any mule burn if we were burning. And then we had the DERA policy, and then last but not least, we had the RSPB, which may come as a surprise to a lot of people.
I'm sure.
But I think one of the advantages in Ireland is we're so used to having to work together that you can work together.
I mean, that's working together on another level. I'm sure there's lots of projects in the UK that have lots of different partners, but no wonder you say in hindsight you would have had a good dinner and then sort of thought, no, I'm not taking this on. I mean, so how did it go? Like you start and what happened next?
Well, the first issue you've got, okay, let's work out the finances. So work out the finances, and then you say, oh, right, we're going to recruit a keeper. And you'll know yourself that an upland keeper is different from a lowland keeper. So you then got to persuade someone who has that knowledge. Now, keepering is, especially upland keeping, is kind of an oral society, a kind of communication. You always have, people who their fathers, their uncles are all keepers. And we'd lost a lot of that. So we had to find someone who's prepared to take the risk to come over. So we recruited a really good guy called Lee McManaman from Scotland. And he was brave enough to come over. But you must remember also that these guys were starting a project from new, four brace on the hill. And there was no likelihood of any shooting. So no tips, nothing which normally enhances a keeper's kind of role.
Wow, I mean that is you don't I hadn't considered the no tips bit. That's a big deal, isn't it?
As a keeper, yeah. But also there's only 8 birds.
Yeah.
Like if you saw a fox, you'd be running after it in your pajamas, wouldn't you? It's 8 birds, yeah. So I mean that's a huge battle you're facing.
But what is fascinating is that as soon as you start putting the bits in places, and you do need a bit of luck in terms of spring, because, a couple of springs we had very wet springs, or we had, snow drifts and all the other bits and pieces. But when you have a good spring, it's extraordinary how numbers jump. And remember, those 4 birds were only of a certain counted area. So it wasn't probably over the whole moor. There would be a few more, but it was still relatively tiny compared to what it should be.
Yeah, and so I mean, obviously, what you were doing worked. You mentioned that you wanted other estates, other moors to learn lessons from what you guys had been doing. Have you started to see other other estates sort of take it up and try and do similar things?
I think what we saw over the last kind of 18 years is you have a number of communities that get together to say, let's kind of, create or restore more. And they've all gone for funding from third parties. And actually, you can't do that. You've actually got to get some altruistic individuals who will support your game, your objectives and your strategy. Because if you're just doing it to get money from the European Union or whatever, it actually doesn't work. And so I think that the first thing to do is to have a very clear strategy in what you're doing. Now, in terms of pushing it out, our birds on the moor seem to be pushing out themselves, much to our irritation, as we seem to have some very lucky neighbours. But I think at the moment, it's taken a lot longer to get to the numbers that we hoped than I expected.
Can you give us a plotted history of that? How has it developed?
Well, I think it's quite an interesting one if you look at just the grouse count. So I just look at the figures about 2019. So the grouse count went from 3 to 4 pair in 2007 to about 306 pair over that counted area. But what was really interesting, it was actually the other bits, and this is where people get really interested, is the skylark and the meadow pippin obviously increased. The Irish hare population went from 54 up to 169. We had our curlews. Now, that's a kind of interesting one, in that I think we actually, this year, we had... That's 69 curlew chicks from 22 broods, averaging 3 chicks per brood, which is actually unheard of in Ireland in terms of population. So really just amazing kind of upside when actually we didn't have that before. And that was all down to be fair, we're working with the RSPB over neighbouring areas. And we've got beat keepers. We've got Merlin, who's our main keeper, and then Lawrence, Andy, Mark, and Sandy are all beat keepers. And they've really done brilliantly in just maintaining the vermin at the appropriate levels. And that's gone straight to the numbers. So I would say that it has been, I think you look at it grouse in a kind of in a one-dimensional way, but it has amazed me the other elements and the other bits of the upside. And those are certainly worth a shout out, I think.
Absolutely.
Well, for me, without a doubt, that is the success story. Obviously, a surplus of grouse so that you might feel you can shoot a few is lovely, but that's the success story. And surely all the partners that you had involved in the early days were quite shocked by the figures that you're able to demonstrate.
They were, and actually it's been a kind of interesting journey because some of our partners or subscribers have dropped out. So as in terms of subscribers, and we've got new subscribers who really generously stepped in. But our financing is now actually in place for another 10, 15 years. So actually, I think we're going to see the real benefits from now on because you're starting to get the size, and all you need is a good spring to add to the numbers. But in terms of the harvestable kind of grouse, we thought we wouldn't be shooting for quite a few years. And I think it was after 3 or 4 years, we suddenly had enough numbers. And we actually did try it with walked up, and then we went over pointers. But because we're in the glens of Antrim, you've got the sea just down below us. The wind was changing the whole time. So very quickly we went to driven. And, within about 8 or 9 years, we were getting coveys of grouse going over us, which, as you can imagine, just so exciting.
Yeah, I can imagine on the first day, you must have just been like, oh my goodness. It would have been tricky to shoot, surely.
That's a really good question. That's a really good point, because actually in Ireland, we're obviously kind of used to kind of shooting driven birds. But no one, unless they go to England or Scotland, shoots driven grouse. So you can imagine, we got a lot of flack from the keeper at the time after our first day about our hit rate. And we had to raise our game quite quickly.
But I mean, the thing that strikes me about this is, on this side of the Irish Sea, we have a lot of opposition to grouse moors in general. But and people make the argument that, oh well, keepers have all these knock-on benefits for species apart from grouse, and that never seems to quite hit home. But what you're sitting on there is an absolutely perfect example of exactly what happens when you have keepers versus what happens when you don't have keepers. It amazes me that we don't see it referenced more often in favour of grouse shooting on this side of the Irish Sea. It's just incredible that it's just an absolutely black and white example.
I think not only that, but going back to what I said right at the beginning about having AFBI involved and the measurement of the habitat, and we have had we've been burning heather as a special project, and it's shown almost no degradation of the sphagnum mosses. And this is, we've had Professor McAdam, monitoring this over the years. And so, because our mosses our bogs or moors are far wetter than in England. So, if you were shooting in Yorkshire in a dry summer in August, you almost see cracking in the peat. But actually, with us, it would still be very wet, and therefore it doesn't have an impact. And we have to, we've had heather beetle, we've had all the usual suspects, which puts you back. But there's no doubt you've got to use these tools in order to improve the habitat. And, your other option is to put windmills or trees on it. And windmills, that affects the drainage of these bogs. And trees, becomes a monoculture.
It's so true. I'm with you, George, though. It's kind of shocking that we're still up against some of the arguments that we face when this is just such a black and white picture of exactly what you can do with careful management. Obviously, the effort that Peter and you and the team have put in at the Irish Grouse Conservation Trust is enormous. I mean, I can't understand. Surely there are other estates nearby that have seen you standing on a driven grouse den thinking, "Ooh, I'd like a bit of that," and we try and put something else into place. I mean, is it just money, or is it something deeper than that as well?
I think it's slightly deeper because it's you've got to align the sporting rights interest with the fee simple, the farmer's interest first of all. So that's your first part of it, and so a lot of the sporting rights were disenfranchised in the 1900s. Money is a lot of it because you can only make this, we are a charity, so therefore we rely on subscribers and the generosity of Caffrey and Dira. And that makes the whole thing work. But if you're trying to start a shoot up from nothing, you've got 10 years of no income. And the other problem is we have a lower density, so we're never going to see the numbers. You can't sell, a 200 brace day. I just can't see that happening, not in the foreseeable future. So the financials don't really work. And when we started off, I said, well, look, it's great. Other people will see what we're doing. The local B&Bs will do well. We'll have a farm, kind of a shooting, a sporting industry, which we can develop. But it's just taken that much longer for all sorts of complicated reasons. And we've had tremendous support from both the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust and Basque. We've had we set up gamekeepers courses. We've done all sorts of things to try and educate people, to try and extend that knowledge. But I just think it just takes longer to really permeate than people realise.
Mm. And you said that you've got funding secured for the next 10 to 15 years. Where do you want to get to in that time? Where would you like to see it get to? Say, by the end of in 10 years' time?
That's a really good question. We had one. We obviously have a benefits kind issue. So we only shoot once every 2 or 3 years whenever there's a harvestable, and we're not shooting big numbers. But to give you an idea, we had one day's driven shoot in August or September this year, or last year, I should say, and we had 70 beaters turn up, and 35 came from Southern Ireland and 35 came from Northern Ireland. And they all wanted to be there on the driven day, on a driven moor in Ireland, because none of them have ever done it. Now, wouldn't it be brilliant if you could say in 10 years' time, there's another moor? and there's another place that does it. And that's, that would be the ideal. But either way, everything we've done has been measured and monitored. So there's a record here that if somebody picked it up in 10, 20 years' time, they could see a blueprint of how to get to A to B. And they could say, this could work for us or not.
I assume when all those betas turn up, you had to manage their expectations. There wasn't a shoot day at the end.
Yeah, I was going to say they're all there for betas day.
What was he called again? I must just check.
Leon.
Yeah, Leon. Yeah,
Leon.
I think the thing that it almost slightly worries me. This, I mean, it's such a good story and it's such a success story. And as you say, like this blueprint, we really need to see others try and take this on, and it needs to be protected, doesn't it? Because it can be used. And it's such a perfect case study to show what happens at such a scale that we just couldn't see in the UK, in England at least. It would be so devastating to have to go through what's happened in Northern Ireland to then try and prove that point. So we've got to use it. I don't really sort of have a question on it. It's just like, my goodness, like, what support do you need, and what are you sort of looking for people to do?
Well, I think, as always, it's kind of getting the word out, getting people to understand some of the issues. And in England, grouse moors, are at risk in other ways. We have no right to roam in Ireland. We have no footpaths, so that part of it's easier. I think that there are bits of what we do which would be incredibly useful, and in looking forward. I think in a project like this, you have got to be quite altruistic. And I remember, and I just kind of just take a step to one side. One of our keepers, 2011, we put forward for a Purdy Award. And people kept saying to me, well, why are you allowing why do you want to do this? And I said, but we want to get the word out. We want people to understand what could happen if you do lose grouse shooting, what we've had to do to get back to, almost a starting point. And the big concern is that if you do well in the Purdy Award, your keeper, your gamekeeper gets poached. And of course he was. So when Alex then asked me, could he, and we got a bronze then, and he said, could we try it again? And they've just taken such a leap of faith to come over and really build their lives over here out of the mainstream kind of moors. Of course, you've got to support it. And of course, as soon as he got the gold, Alec got headhunted. But the difference is there's so much goodwill. He straight away organized a really good guy to come in his place. So it wasn't as if he was kind of leaving us in the lurch. There's a lot of goodwill. And they all know what we're trying to do, and they're all trying to support it. And I think that was a really interesting example of, how you can support people and how, your faith in someone will be returned.
It hadn't quite occurred to me the downside of winning a Purdy Award. You've almost explained why no one should ever enter, which is just awful. I didn't realise. I didn't realise Alex had left. So what's the situation now then? Is it just, you've got yourself a good base to continue working forward year on year. You're focusing on all the wild birds, the ground nesting birds that are doing so well, and then putting out that good news?
Well, as I kind of inferred, Alec then introduced Merlin Becker, who had actually worked for the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust over in Scotland. And it's as part of what we do is education. So, we're having to give talks. The gamekeeper, especially, has to go to CAFRI. He's going to have to teach kind of gamekeeping courses. He's going to have to, talk at grouse conferences. And so, Merlin is very good at that. And so it makes you realize that every project, there are stages in the project. And if you just a little bit of luck, you get the right person for the right stage. And we have a really good guy at the moment. We actually have always been lucky with the people, because I think that anyone who's prepared to take the leap of faith to come to Ireland, either slightly mad, but they also they really believe in the sport and they want to make a difference. And if they're on a big moor in Scotland or England, there'll be a beat keeper for a long time. It's kind of dead men's shoes. Whereas here, they had an opportunity to really make a difference. And that's where we were lucky.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly inspiring story. And, I, with my editor's hat on, we will do everything that we can through the podcast and through our platforms to continue spreading the word about what you're doing out there. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I agree entirely.
Thank you.
Right. So I think it's probably about time we started to wrap up. So, Peter, the way we like to finish our podcasts off is with a segment we call Desert Island Shooting. And we ask our guests to imagine, and I don't suppose it'll be too much of a stretch of the imagination for you, that shooting is on its way out. And you've got one final opportunity to enjoy a day, a trip, a weekend. Money's no object. Logistics aren't a problem. You can have anybody with you and do anything. What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? Who are you taking?
It's given me a lot of kind of angst, this particular question, and I'll take you on the journey because it might explain it. I was shooting boar in France a few years ago, and there was an Austrian there, and he recounted this amazing stalk he had done shooting capercaillie in Austria, and it happens in May. And I understand what you do is you get up extremely early in the morning, and you climb a mountain in the dark, and you get up to the level where the capercaillie are kind of the males are kind of chatting the girls up, and by about 5 o'clock you should be roughly in position, and then you kind of wait for the males to start singing and dancing and or calling, and then you shoot them. And I thought, God, that's amazing. And I remember being absolutely struck by this at the time. And then I thought to myself, this is the last day. Really? Is that what I want to do? I can buy all the lovely Austrian kind of lederhosen and all the other kit, and it's fantastic, have all the kit and all the fun. But, this is the last day. So is this going to really be right? And then I thought to myself, no, I'll tell you what I really would love to do. And we always had a pheasant shoot here at Lisnore. We then 20 years ago, I stopped the pheasant shoot. We focused purely on woodcock and snipe, and because the woods we've got a lot. We rewilded before everyone in England discovered the term, and so we've got a lot of rough country, let's say, and so I adore shooting woodcock, and we have 2 days of driven woodcock here, and because you've got no pheasants on the ground, we're only touching a bit of it, there's a lot of woodcock, and they're all migratory woodcock, and we've seen no drop-off in numbers at all. So therefore, my final kind of desert island kind of day shooting would be having some of my best mates come to stay here. Now, there's a caveat here, because I'd need someone to make sure that I'd need a cook, I'd need a butler, and somebody to serve drinks, because it's critical on the Friday. It's critical that they stop us drinking, because it's like Friday, you just get overexcited, and the next day you're just so you can't even talk. So I want someone who could just gently just wean me off it at about midnight and say, Peter, time for bed, and then a bit like what my wife does actually, and then but I want someone to just take me off. So then I go to bed, wake up in the morning, and I have a fantastic day driven. But to do that, I have to have a bit of snow on the glens behind us, and that brings the woodcock down. So I want a really heavy dump of snow and a lovely crisp sunny day, no clouds, and a really crisp day with about 10 of my really good friends and my usual team of beaters here, and just have a fantastic day, and then finish it with a fantastic dinner that night, because I'll have a very light lunch. Obviously, we discussed this before. 1 hour, that's all you've got. Then you've got a snooze time, and then dinner. And at that dinner, there'll be no one telling me to go to bed. There'll be no one telling me that I've drunk too much, and we can play a game of Frida late at night, and that would round off my last day shooting.
It's brilliant. It's one of the most detailed ones we've had so far as well. I like it a lot. I think every shoot lodge and shooting pub should have an employee on a Friday night whose sole responsibility is to say, no, go to bed.
I hate those people at the night before a shoot.
Yeah, but you and I are the ones who need it more than anybody, Chris.
I'm part of that club as well.
We should get together. What I like there is that I've pictured the scenery so well. The fact that you've organised the snow, the big dump of snow on the tops of the mountains to bring the woodcock down. That's mega. I don't think anyone on their desert island shooting has organised a dump of snow yet. So that's good. And it'd just be lovely. Yeah, really enjoyable.
Amazing. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, Peter, thank you ever so much for coming and joining us. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, thank you, Peter.
Well, thank you very much for asking me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Great. So before we go, as per usual, there is one final reminder that you can get your hands on a pair of the highly exclusive, highly desirable Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters by sending us your shooting dilemmas for us to resolve, or by sending us your unpopular opinions, nominating a shooting hero, or just by getting in touch to let us know where you've been listening. Drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com, and if we read it out in the next episode or any future episodes, you will qualify for some garters. We will be back very soon, I promise, with the 50th episode. Until then, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.
Wow.